Chapter 42. In public, the young Shah cut a fine figure. He appeared royal, did not smile to excess, and waved his pale hand in greeting to his subjects. However, once back at the palace, he caused great concern to his courtiers. Having been brutally separated from his parents, he cried and cried. He even tried to run away that summer in order to join his father and mother. When he was caught, he tried to hang himself from the palace ceiling, but when he started to choke, he took fright, called for help, and was rescued in time. That misadventure had a beneficial effect on him. He was now cured of his anxieties and would act his role of constitutional monarch in a dignified and good natured manner. Real power, however, was in the hands of Faisal and his friends. They inaugurated the new era with a purge. 6 supporters of the old regime were executed, including the 2 main religious chiefs of Tabriz who had led the struggle against the sons of Adam, as well as Sheikh Fazullah Nouri. He was accused of having given his backing to the massacres which followed the coup d'etat the previous year. He therefore was convicted on a charge of collusion to murder, and his death warrant was ratified by the Shiite hierarchy. However, there was hardly any doubt that the sentence had symbolic value. Nouri had been responsible for decreeing that the constitution was a heresy. He was hanged in public in the Topakhan Square on 31st July 1909. Before he died, he murmured, "I am not a reactionary," only to follow this by stating to his supporters, who were dotted throughout the crowd, that the Constitution was contrary to their religion and that religion would have the last word. The first task of the new leaders, however, was to rebuild the parliament. The building rose out of its ruins and elections were organized. On 15th November, the young Shah formally inaugurated the second Majlis in Persian history with these words: "In the name of God who has given us freedom, and with the protection of His Holiness, the hidden Imam, the National Consultative Assembly is hereby opened in joy and with the best omens. Intellectual progress and the evolution of our way of thinking have rendered change inevitable. It has come about after a dreadful ordeal, but Persia has known, down the centuries, how to survive many crises, and today its people see their desires accomplished. We are happy to state that the new progressive government enjoys the support of the people, and that it is bringing peace and confidence back to the country. In order to be able to carry out the necessary reform, it must be a priority of the government and the parliament to bring the state, particularly its public finances, into line with the accepted norms for civilized nations. We beseech God to guide the representatives of the nation and to assure honor, independence, and happiness for Persia." Tehran was jubilant that day. Everyone was out in the streets singing at the crossroads, reciting improvised poems whose words all either rhymed or were made to rhyme with constitution, democracy, or liberty. Merchants offered the passerby drinks and sweetmeats, and dozens of newspapers which had been silenced after the coup d'etat brought out special editions announcing their resurrection. At nightfall, fireworks lit up the city. Seating had been erected in the gardens of the Beheristan. The diplomatic corps sat on the grandstand together with members of the new government, deputies, religious dignitaries, and the bazaar guilds. As a friend of Baskerville, I was entitled to sit near the front, and my chair was just behind Faisal's. There was a stream of explosions and bangs. The sky was lit up at times, and people turned their heads and leaned to and fro, smiling like overjoyed children. Outside, sons of Adam tirelessly chanted the same slogans for hours. I do not know what noise or shout brought Howard back into my thoughts. He so deserved to be at the celebration. At that very moment, Faisal turned to me. You seem sad. Sad. Certainly not. I have always wanted to hear the word freedom ringing out on the soil of the Orient, but some memories are bothering me. Cast them aside. Smile and rejoice. Make the most of the last moments of exhilaration. Worry and worse which divested me of any wish to celebrate that evening. Was Faisal, after an interval of 7 months, about to take up the difficult discussion which set us against each other in Tabriz? Did he have new cause for worry? I made up my mind to go and see him the following day for an explanation, but in the end I decided against it. I avoided seeing him for a whole year. What were the reasons? I believe that after the arduous adventure I had just been through, I had some nagging doubts about the wisdom of the role I had played in Tabriz. I had come to the Orient in search of a manuscript, and had it been right for me to become so involved in a struggle which was not mine? To begin with, by what right had I advised Howard to come to Persia? In the language of Faisal and his friends, Baskerville was a martyr. In my eyes, he was a dead friend, a friend who had died in a foreign country for a foreign cause, a friend whose parents would one day write to me to ask me in the most poignantly polite of terms why I had led their son astray. Was it remorse I was feeling over Howard? It was, to be more correct, a certain feeling of decency. I do not know if that is the right word, but I am trying to say that after my friend's victory, I had no desire to strut around Tehran listening to people laud my supposed exploits during the siege of Tabriz. I had played a minimal and quite fortuitous role. Above all, I had had a friend who was a heroic compatriot, and I had no intention of exploiting his memory to obtain privileges and respect for myself. To tell the whole truth, I felt a great need to disappear from view, to be forgotten, and not to visit politicians, Anjuman members, and diplomats. The only person that I saw every day, and with a pleasure that never diminished, was Shireen. I had talked I had talked her into going to live in one of the numerous residences belonging to her family in the heights of Zarganda, a holiday resort outside the capital. I myself had rented a small house in the neighborhood, but that was for the sake of appearances, and I spent my days and nights as Shireen's, with the collusion of her servants. That winter, we managed to spend whole weeks without leaving her huge bedroom. We were warmed by a magnificent copper brazier. We read the manuscript and some other books, lazed around for hours smoking the kalyan, drinking Shiraz wine, and sometimes even champagne, munching Kirmani pistachios and Isfahani nougat. My princess could be a great lady or a little girl at one and the same time, and we felt great tenderness for each other the whole time. With the onset of the first warm days, Zarganda started to liven up. Foreigners and the richest Persians had sumptuous houses there and would move in for long months of idleness surrounded by luxuriant vegetation. It is a matter beyond dispute that only the proximity of this paradise made the grey dullness of Tehran bearable for innumerable diplomats. However, Zarganda became a ghost town in the winter, with only the gardeners, some caretakers, and the rare survivors of its indigenous population staying behind. Shireen and I were badly in need of just such a desert. However, from April on, alas, the visitors took up their summer lodgings. There were people strolling in front to all the entrance gates, and people walking down all the paths. After every night and every siesta, Shireen offered tea to female visitors with roving eyes. I was always having to hide or flee down the corridors. The gentle months of hibernation had been used up, and it was time for me to leave. When I informed her, my princess was sad but resigned. I thought you were happy. I have experienced a rare moment of happiness. I want to put it in suspended animation so that it will still be intact when I come back to it. I never tire of watching you with both astonishment and love. I do not want the invading crowd to change the way I see you. I am going away in the summer so that I may find you again in the winter. Summer, winter, you go away, you come back. You think that you can dispose of the seasons, the years, your life and mine with impunity. Have you learned nothing from Khayyam? Suddenly, heaven robs you of even the moment you need to moisten your lips. She looked deep into my eyes as if she were reading an open book. She had understood everything and sighed. Where are you thinking of going? I did not know yet. I had come to Persia twice, and twice I had led a besieged existence. I still had the whole of the Orient to discover, from the Bosphorus to the China Sea. Turkey, which had just risen up at the same time as Persia, which deposed its Sultan Khalif, and which now prides itself upon its deputies, senators, clubs, and opposition newspapers. Proud Afghanistan, which the British managed to subdue, but at what cost? And of course, there was all of Persia to explore. I knew only Tabriz and Tehran, but what of Isfahan, Shiraz, Kashan and Kirman, Nishapur and Khayyam's tomb, a grey stone watched over for centuries by untiring generations of perils? Out of all the roads which lay before me, which should I take? It was the manuscript which chose for me. I took the train to Kranskvods, crossed Ashgabat and an old Marwa, and hence to Bukhara. Most importantly, I went to Samarkand. Chapter 43. I was curious to see what was left of the city where Khayyam spent the flower of his youth. What had become of the district of Asfizar, and that of Belvedere in the garden where Omar had loved the Jehan? Was there still some trace of the suburb of Maturid, where in the 11th century that Jewish paper maker was still turning white mulberry branches into pulp according to an old Chinese recipe? For weeks I went about on foot and then on a mule. I questioned the merchants, the passers-by, and the imams of the mosques, but they only replied with blank, unknowing looks, amused smiles, and generous invitations for me to squat on their sky-blue divans and take tea with them. It was my luck to be in the Registan Square one morning. A caravan was passing. It was a short caravan consisting of just 6 or 7 thick-haired and heavy-hoofed Bactrian camels. The old camel driver had stopped not far from me in front of a potter's stall, holding a newborn lamb to his chest. He proposed a barter, and the craftsman discussed it. Without taking his hands off the jar or the wheel, he pointed with his chin toward a pile of varnished vessels. I watched the two men with their black bordered woolen hats, their striped robes, reddish beards, and their ancient gestures. Was there any detail of this scene which had not come down unchanged from the time of Khayyam? There was a slight breeze, and the sand started to swirl. Their clothing billowed, and the whole square was covered with an unreal haze. I cast my eyes around. At the edge of the square rose 3 monuments, 3 gigantic complexes of towers, domes, gateways, and high walls completely covered with minute mosaics, arabesques studded with gold, amethyst and turquoise, and intricate calligraphy. It all retained its majesty, but the towers were leaning, the domes had gaping holes, the facades were crumbling, ravaged by time, wind, and centuries of neglect. People no longer looked at these monuments, these haughty, proud, and forgotten giants which provided an imposing backdrop for a desultory play. I was retreating backwards and stepped on someone's foot. When I turned around to apologize, I saw I was face to face with a man dressed like me in European clothing, a man who had set sail from the same distant planet. We struck up conversation. He was Russian, an archaeologist. He also had come with 1,000 questions, but he already had some answers. In Samarkand, time moves from one cataclysm to the next, and from one tabula rasa to the next. When the Mongols destroyed the city in the 13th century, its various districts were left a mass of ruins and corpses. It had to be abandoned. The survivors went to rebuild their dwellings on another site, further to the south, with the result that the whole of the old city, the Samarkand of the Seljuks, was gradually covered by layers of sand and became a raised field. There are treasures and secrets under the ground, but the surface is a pasture. One day it will all have to be opened up, the houses and the street dug up. Once freed, Samarkand will be able to tell us its history. He broke off. Are you an archaeologist? No. This city attracts me for other reasons. Would it be impolite of me to ask what they are? I told him of the manuscript, the poems, the chronicle, and the paintings which evoked the lovers of Samarkand. I would love to see that book. Do you know that everything from that time has been destroyed, as if by a curse? Walls, palaces, orchards, gardens, water pipes, religious sites, books, and the principal objects of the art. The monuments which we admire today were all built later by the Tamerlane and his descendants. They are less than 500 years old. From Khayyam's era, we only have potsherds, and as you have just informed me, this manuscript which has miraculously survived. It is a privilege for you to be able to hold it in your hand and read it at your leisure. It is a privilege and also a heavy responsibility. Believe me, I am quite aware of that. For years, ever since I learned that this book existed, I have lived for nothing else. It has led me from adventure to adventure. Its world has become mine, and its guardian my beloved. And have you made this trip to Samarkand to discover the places it describes? I was hoping that the townspeople would be able to at least give me some indication of where the old districts lay. I am sorry to have to disappoint you, the Russian continued, but if you are searching for something from the period for which you have a fascination, you will only gather legends, stories of jinns and divs. This city cultivates them with delight. More than other cities in Asia? I'm afraid so. I wonder if the proximity of these ruins does not naturally inflame the imagination of our miserable contemporaries. Then there is the city which is buried under the ground. Over the centuries, how many children have fallen down cracks never to reappear? What strange sounds people have heard or thought that they heard, apparently coming out of the entrails of the earth. That is how Samarkand's most famous legend was born, the legend which had a lot to do with the mystery which envelops the name of the city. I let him tell the story. It was told that a king of Samarkand wanted to make everyone's dream come true, to escape death. He was convinced that death came from the sky and he wanted to do something so that it could never reach him. So he built an immense underground palace of iron which he made inaccessible. Being fabulously rich, he also had fashioned an artificial sun, which rose in the morning and set in the evening to warm him and indicate the passing of days. Alas, the god of death managed to foil the monarch's vigilance, and he slept inside the palace to accomplish his job. He had to show all humans that no creature could escape death, no matter how powerful, skillful, or arrogant he was. Samarkand thus became the symbol of the inescapable meeting between man and his destiny. And after Samarkand, where to? For me, it was the furthest extremity of the Orient, the place of all wonders and unfathomable nostalgia. The moment I left the city, I decided to go back home. My desire was to be back in Annapolis and to spend some sedentary years there, resting from my travels, only then to set off again. I thus drew up the most insane plan, that of going back to Persia to fetch Shireen and the Khayyam manuscript, and then to go off and disappear in some great metropolis such as Paris, Vienna, or New York, for the two of us to live in the West, but to an Oriental rhythm. Would that not be paradise? On my way back, I was continually alone and distracted, preoccupied solely with the arguments that I was going to present to Shireen. Leave? Leave? She would say wearily. Is it not enough for you to be happy? However, I did not despair of being able to overcome her reservations. When the convertible which I had rented at the edge of the Caspian set me down at Zarganda in front of my closed door, there was a car there already, a Jewel 40 sporting a star-spangled banner right in the middle of its hood. The chauffeur stepped out and inquired as to my identity. I had the idiotic impression that he had been waiting for me ever since I left. He reassured me that he had only been there since the morning. My master told me to stay here until you came back. I might have come back in a month, a year, or perhaps never. My astonishment hardly upset him. But you are here now. He handed me a note scribbled by Charles W. Russell, Minister Plenipotentiary of the United States. Dear Mr. Lesage, I would be most honored if you could come to the legation this afternoon at 4 o'clock. It is a matter of great importance and urgency. I have asked my chauffeur to remain at your disposal.